is Evelyn Shaw. I usually go by Evie, like the Pokemon, kind of the easiest way to remember it. I am the Senior Manager of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Split Software. We are a tech company. Our headquarters are in Silicon Valley in California. We do have offices as well around the US and globally. So we have a lot of folks in Argentina, in Tandil, as well as a presence in the UK and London. And we are a feature delivery platform. So just a little bit on the company to give some context. What that means as a feature delivery platform is that we offer a feature flag solution, which allows people to basically schedule their releases and do so in a way that is safer, more effective, and often faster to be able to release. So companies and developers are able to put the things that they want to release, their features, behind the flag, and then schedule that flag to go out to a particular subset, a particular audience, to incrementally go out over time, to basically control it in a way that makes it safer and that they can monitor more easily for themselves. So that's the kind of core of the feature delivery part themselves. Hi, Adriana. And then the other aspect of our platform that's really exciting is the data behind it. So on top of all of those feature flags, we basically connect all your data into those flags as well. So you can actually see, are my releases as meaningful as I think they are? Like, are they having the impact that I'm hoping that they do on the metrics that I care about? And you can do a lot of experimentation. So that's kind of what the company does, where a lot of people come to us for this feature flag solution because it makes their engineers feel safer, it makes their company be able to release faster. And then they stay and really expand because of this data platform behind it. And they can really see more of the value and experiment for those things. So that's the product and the company. This is kind of an update there. For myself, as I mentioned, I'm currently focused on the diversity, equity, inclusion space for the company, but I also have a bit of a varied background. So I actually started in tech as a technical recruiter way back when, did that for a while, switched into engineering to be a technical program manager. And then I actually switched industries a little bit from tech into entertainment, where I was chief of staff for a virtual reality, augmented reality studio for a few years. And then I found myself kind of back in technology, back on the technical program management side for Split, and then recently transitioned into diversity, equity, and inclusion there as well. So I've been at Split for, I think about 2 years or so now, kind of lose track of time. But feel free to ask me any questions about the company, about my background, career-wise, anything that folks might be interested in. Is there anything that anyone would like me to talk about, or any questions so far? Okay, looks like we have a question from Emma. Why did you choose to work for Split? What advice would you give to job seekers when looking at companies and a career shift? So for me, working at Split was a bit of a journey, I think. Like I mentioned, I had moved out of tech into more of the entertainment space, and then I got burnt out, and then kind of just I'll get through it. Okay, so kind of got burnt out, and then had a friend that was working at Split. This is right when COVID hit. I had a friend that was working at Split, and he was like, "Hey, I just need some help, like doing program management. Are you interested?" And maybe just doing some part time, or like getting involved and helping me out for a bit. And so I did, not really knowing what Split was too much. And honestly, the people and the culture really just kind of won me over. I think everyone is so curious, so warm. There really is that effort on the diversity, equity, and inclusion side that felt really meaningful for me. And that's kind of where I ended up choosing to stay and do full time and really invest in Split for myself. And then Shanti, just to kind of the quick rundown for Split, we are a tech company where we are a feature delivery platform where we have a feature flag solution that people can use to control their releases and release things more carefully. They can split it out. They can experiment with the releases, sequences out, do rollbacks easily, all of those things, backed up by a data platform underneath that, where you can actually look at the releases and the flags that you have, and then measure that against the business value metrics that you're tracking. So that's kind of where the company is. Um, and then in terms of advice for job seekers looking for new companies in a career shift, I've been thinking about this one a lot with my own change into DEI. Like it was one of those things where, especially kind of talking to this kind of audience, it really made me realize that um, the diversity, equity, and inclusion piece is so important for me. And as I've gone on in my career, I've really started to lean in more to what my values are. Like, what are the things that I really care about? If I'm spending so much of my time working with my coworkers each day, like, and I have a family and those things, like, I really want to make sure that the place that I work for really aligns to those values. Um, and so for me, seeing that kind of passion around the DEI space for Split, as well as kind of the warmth, the curiosity, the passion for learning and growth and development, all of those things really spoke to me. And I would really encourage for folks when you look at new companies and you think about a career shift, um, really prioritize for yourself. Like, what is it that I'm looking to get for myself right now? Um, because at different points in your life it will be different. When I was making some switches, I prioritized, learning a new skill set. Like it wasn't as important to me the size of the team or the compensation or things like that. But I wanted to kind of step into a new space. Other times in my life, I've prioritized my work life balance, in terms of kind of starting a family and being able to have those kind of things, having benefits there. And then, as I mentioned recently, really looking in towards my values. So really kind of sit with yourself and think a little bit about what is it that you're hoping to unlock for yourself in this next stage in your career. Um, and then ask those questions as you kind of talk to folks and interview and look at companies. As I always hope that you never know how long you're going to be in a company for. But I always hope that when I look for a company and I speak to someone, that I can be there for a long time, even if it doesn't end up that way. Like I choose to look for something that I feel like, hey, like this is something exciting to me personally, and they're well aligned with my values and where I am. That like there's there's that opportunity and that growth potential here. Thinking about this year's International Women's Day theme, Break the Bias, as you look back in your career, what is one thing you would have changed in your working environment to break the bias? It's a really interesting question. Um, I think that for me, as I mentioned, I've transitioned into a couple of different types of roles in my career. And so much of it starts from, I think when we talk about things like imposter syndrome and whatnot for women in the space, like those are things that I feel like I grappled with a lot, especially early in my career. I especially when I first switched into the technical space from not having a traditional technical background, like I didn't study computer science or anything like that at university or whatnot. And what I really benefited from was really having a team and a manager who could really work with me on those things, like not just kind of about the job itself, like career rubrics and all of those things, but like there's a lot of really deep personal and emotional things that I strongly feel change how you kind of interact at work. Um, like for example, um, the my manager at the time when he took over, one of my managers when he was taking over my team, um, one of the first things that he told me was, "Hey, you're being underpaid because you shifted into this department from a different department, and the salary bands were not equivalent. So I'm going to fix that for you because I think you are like fearless. I think you're courageous about doing these things, and like we should fix that." Um, and it was not something that I was even on my radar at that point. Um, And it was really powerful for me to have that kind of support and to see the kind of advocacy that someone could do for another person in a working environment. So when I think about my career and the things I really hope to change, it's really about that kind of like that space for advocacy, that lifting up of each other, um, and really creating kind of the bounds to say like, hey, these are the things that are important. You know, like these things change people's lives. They change like that changed the whole direction of my earning. You know, um, so really opening up those kind of conversations and as an individual figuring out like what is it for me that I might struggle with, um, that come from like different parts of my background, my identity, whether it's imposter syndrome, whether it's other things from my childhood, um, working on those things as well and making sure that feeds into your career and there's that alignment, in both your personal life and your work life. And then trying to help someone else do that. You know, that's a lot of why I ended up switching over into diversity, equity, and inclusion right now, because I really want to try to make things better for the people that I care about, um, and my friends and my colleagues at the company. And so yeah, that's what I would say is like it would be great to have that supportive environment, to have that advocacy, that sponsorship, looking at mentorship, all of those ways to just change someone's life, for the better. On the topic of compensation, any tips on how to know how much you should expect? Any recommendations for maybe online resources that accumulate this info? That's a great question. I will speak to this a little bit as a past recruiter, as a past technical recruiter. Um, it is almost always to your disadvantage to give a salary number first. So in the interviewing process, most recruiters will ask like, "What are your expectations?" Um, you have to be careful that they not ask you what you're currently making, especially since like certain groups that are known, and women are one of these, where if you are traditionally paid less, that just keeps you at a lower level. Um, so don't share your current salary. And unless you know you are way beyond experience or like your current salary is your expectations are high, that they're probably at the high end of what kind of you're looking for in this industry. Unless you know that is true, don't share a number. Um, and you will probably get some pushback from the recruiter who will ask you in a couple of different ways to, you know, and they might say things like, "Hey, like I can't make an offer without knowing what your expectations are." That's usually not true. And honestly, if they continue to kind of block you in the process, that's probably not a company that you want to engage with, just from an equity, standpoint. And so I don't have, information to just to yeah, actually, that's true. And you actually can check legally, because some states you actually are not recruiters or companies are not allowed to ask you actually what your last salary is. Um, and other states, they're actually required to tell you their salary band, once you're in a meaningful conversation with them. So I would also check your local laws, just to kind of see. Um, and the way to phrase that if someone asks you and you're not comfortable sharing is just say like, "Hey, you know, like you have all the market information. Like I really trust that your company values, kind of like what I can bring, and you are in the best position to make that call. So I would love to just kind of continue the conversation, see what the offer is, and then have a discussion from there. And I'm not going to like if your worry is that I'll see the offer and think like, oh, that's so low, I don't want to continue. Like I can promise you that's not what my reaction will be. Like I really appreciate just having the open conversation and having your company kind of assess that, based on the value that you think you'll have, and that we can do that. That's kind of the way to respond, as you're going through it. Hopefully that helps. Oh my God. When they do give you a salary number, do you immediately ask, is that negotiable? I think there's a it kind of depends on the context and the relationship that you have. So there is always the studies that women don't negotiate as much as men, right? When they get the salaries. Usually there is a little bit of allowance on top of an offer most of the time. Not always true, but in general, people know like they might come back and ask for something else. Um, what's more important here is probably the framing of it. And instead of asking like, "Hey, is that negotiable?" Try to kind of walk the recruiter through kind of the situation for yourself. So you can say something like, "Hey, like, thanks so much for the offer. I'm really excited. I do have a small concern around this area, or I have a concern around this. Um, like, here's what I was hoping for, or like something like I was hoping for something a little bit more. Is that something that's an option? Because I feel like we are very aligned on everything else in the company, the role, the values. And I don't want the compensation to be the only thing that is kind of holding this back. Like, can we have a discussion about that?" Um, so I would probably go into it in that sense, framing it so that it's not as there's less likelihood for that person to the recruiter to be more defensive, but more about like, let's work on this, let's talk through this together. And a great tip or strategy of potentially getting an increased offer is saying like, hey, this is the only thing that I need. So if you're able to help me get to this number or something like that, I can guarantee you that I will take this offer. Like if you're already at that stage in the process, usually giving your recruiter the data or something to advocate for you works out the best in those cases. And then from Emma, what's one suggestion you have for those who want to get started learning about DEI? That's a great question. I think, DEI is one of those areas that is always around you, right? Like it can be a part of so many parts of your daily work. And that's where it's not very obvious. Like you go through your job, you go through your projects, and you never realize like, oh, there's actually an opportunity here to bring up something related to DEI. Like for example, one of the areas that we are thinking about a lot at Split is neurodivergence. And neurodivergence is when a person is processes and thinks about things differently. And it changes kind of the behaviors of how they might work or operate or do things. So some common things, some common examples of this might be someone who is OCD, or like other types of conditions and things like that. And when you think about those aspects of DEI, you can look at the way that your team operates and the way that you work and just think like, how does this actually impact, like for other people on my team, like what kind of experience are they having? Are things really strict? Do people have the flexibility to choose how they work if they think about things differently? Or even things as small as like, hey, I'm sending my information. I always send information through text via email. Maybe someone needs visuals to learn more. Maybe I should start including different types of info. I think there's always ways to find pieces of DEI in what you're working on. And so if you're thinking about starting to get learning, it's really just kind of checking like, what are your assumptions? Like, how do you operate? What are some of the ways that people do experience this differently? And there's so many different categories of that, right? There's like race, sexuality, ethnicity. We mentioned divergence, neurodivergence. Like there's so many aspects that you can always kind of look towards like, hey, I've never thought about someone's experience in this. I want to learn a little bit more. And there's so many resources out there now to do that. So it's very easy now, I think, to get started to learn about it. And then really just start to think about how you can help support people and really yourself as well, and the identities that you come from too. I feel like I rambled a bit there, so let me know if that doesn't answer your question. But anything else that I can answer for folks? Do we have QA positions? Let me pop in the careers page that we have. I don't believe that there is a QA role open right now, but But if there does come one that opens up the next one, it will show up on this page. So I'm kind of curious if I can pose a question to the group. Like for Split, as I mentioned, I focus on diversity, equity, inclusion right now, and we're still a fairly small company. We're about a little around 200 or so globally, and I'm kind of curious for us, like it is in some ways early for us to have a full-time role based on it, but something I'm really grateful that the company is investing in to do that, um, and I'm curious for this group. Like when you're looking at companies and evaluating, how many of you look specifically for a diversity, equity, inclusion type of program or effort? Oh, and it looks like there's some questions coming in chat. Do we hire dev roles? I'm sorry, Kendi, I don't think I know. I'm not familiar with dev roles as a role. So you might have to clarify for that for me while in there. Fall interns, we do not currently hire interns right now. It is, as I mentioned, the career page is in that chat there. So if it does come up, it will get posted, but right now we don't currently have any. Beyond base salary, what are other components like shares, bonuses that can be negotiated with the hiring manager? How exactly can we negotiate shares and bonuses? So that's a great question. There is always there's always other things that you can ask for, right, in your compensation. And that's actually a great strategy because a lot of people get stuck a little bit sometimes on just the money aspect. But you could always ask about shares. You could always ask about bonuses. You could also negotiate things like paid time off or vacation, a later start date. There's all these things of value that a company can also offer. And so when you go into a negotiation, again, the thing to do is to check like what's important to me. Like maybe I'm okay with the compensation, but what I really care about is that I have this vacation coming up and that I'm going to be able to take it, or that I am able to sign off, always at like 5 p.m. And make sure that I can do that for my family. Like those are all things that you can bring up in a negotiation. And the way to bring it up is to say like, hey, like, thank you so much for the offer. Again, I'm really excited about this. Like, I know there might be limits on things like compensation, but what about things like our like a vacation side? If we're not able to necessarily move on some of the other aspects of the offer, can we talk about things like, yeah, like vacation coming up or paid time off, and just make sure that those are aligned, and maybe we can subset some of those in. You can always ask about those things. Shares and bonuses have the same component as salary, where there is more of a limit on them. Like there's often a band there. So you can ask about it in the same way as you would compensation, but just know that you might hit a limit. But things like PTO, vacation, even some perks, like some of those things are actually way more negotiable if you bring it up. So it's worth kind of thinking about those places as well. Let's see. I'm just scanning the chat here. Developer advocate. Yes, we do have developer advocates on our team. I don't think we are hiring one right now, but we do have some developer advocate roles in the company. So if those open up, then it will show up in that careers page. But we do have that position in the company. And then just kind of reading through these DEI comments. Yeah, I'm glad to hear that that folks are asking about it. And it is really hard to ask, right? Like it's always kind of like everyone's gonna have the answer now. I think in tech companies, like people always will say those things, but it's really kind of getting to kind of Mary's comment in here, like can they really speak about how it's involved in their structure? How is actually baked into the strategy about what's happening in the company? Is their executive staff invested in it? And what is an example of that? That's always a great question to ask. Like it's always, you can also ask things like, like what have you done personally to interview? What have you done, or what has your company done in the last, month or a couple weeks that to bring DEI front and center. You can always do like get into a little bit more specifics. One thing to look for is really like, do they sound like they're kind of checking the box in DEI, or is it actually a piece of the strategy? Like, can people articulate the value of what DEI is bringing to their teams? Those are always great ways to kind of get a feel for that in the interview process. We are outlining all these comments. Yep. Yeah, I think that's a great comment, Mary. And that's kind of where I think to what you were saying before, like you really have to think about like what are you really asked about, like what is the structure, like how are you structurally bringing change to those companies, and what is it coming into, like are they tracking numbers around DEI is actually a great question. Do they have a full-time role around DEI? Like those are clear indicators that people should have clear-cut answers to. So those are great ones to point out. Okay, I think we're just about here then. But thank you so much for kind of hanging out with me a little bit and for some great questions and some conversations. I will drop my LinkedIn back into the chat here. And feel free, as I said, feel free to reach out, connect. Really was a pleasure to chat with you all, and have a great rest of your Women Tech Conference. Take care, everyone.